Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us on the Ironside Take30 this morning. My name is Mike Wilson, and today we're going to be discussing AWS S3 and data lakes will be the topic. So as you can see on the slide here, we've got the agenda set up on the left-hand side. The first portion of this, we're going to do a little background on Ironside, and we'll talk a little bit about the AWS architecture. Then we're going to get into an overview on what S3 is and how to use it. We're going to talk about the different storage classes within inside of S3, as well as talking about security and pricing. So let's move on to the slide. So these Take 30s are really designed to help our clients make better decisions for their business. And we're trying to help you understand the different technologies that are out there so you can make the right decisions about how to use those technologies and use them the most efficiently within your processes. This slide talks about Ironside's capabilities. And if you look in the middle, a lot of the portion of the middle of this really talks about our methodology and some of our capabilities. But if you look around the side, we've got some of our capabilities as far as what we do as far as MDM and data integration, data warehousing and data lakes, and we talk about platform management, managed services. So this is kind of an overall view of our company and what our capabilities are. So some of you might have already seen this before, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on it, but I just wanted to go over it with you. A little background on myself. I have been doing this for 25 years, mostly in data integration, data warehousing, data governance, as well as business intelligence and analytics. So so we've been in this game for a little while now. So I'm going to turn it over to Jeff, and he's going to go through this AWS architecture slide, Jeff Spear. So go ahead, Jeff, take over.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. This is a slide from an earlier Take 30 that we did talking about an AWS architecture example using AWS services. And we just wanted to review this to sort of give some context to where S3 might come in. So in this slide, we've got source data coming in from a few different places, flat files, relational databases on the left, and through an ETL process using DMS and AWS Glue, the idea is that those files and information would get staged in S3 in sort of a raw original format, and that would really serve as your data lake. Often, once you have the data there, you will then use further ETL to move it to a transformed format, often again within S3, and then from there you might move it to a data warehouse in Redshift or some other technology. So often, the data lake is usually not the end point for all of your data. Some of the data is going to stay there and only be in the data lake, but some will get refined into things like data warehouses. So that's sort of an example larger architecture where S3 might be used. Back to you, Mike.
Thanks, Jeff. Thank you, Jeff. So before we get into the actual meat of the presentation, we wanted to set up a poll for everyone to ask questions about our upcoming Redshift Take 30, which is happening next week. So we would like to see what features you may want to learn about about Redshift for next week, so that we can customize the presentation a little bit more. And while you guys are doing that, I'm going to talk a little bit about what data lakes are and what they aren't. So a data lake is a centralized repository that allows you to store structured and unstructured data, which means any kind of files, really. So because S3 is an object-based storage, you can store any kind of files you want in that system. So the way that it differs from a data warehouse is that data warehouses are typically highly structured schemas that allow you to then do customized analytics against them. But there's a exhaustive process to go through and create the data warehouse. So there's a lot of work that goes into actually creating it, and generally it's not going to be all of your content that's in there. It's going to be a limited amount, whereas the data lake really can contain anything, and you can set analytics up on top of that and do visualizations and dashboards on top of it. So as Jeff said, data lakes are usually like a repository that can be used to then feed a data warehouse, but analytic can also be run against it.
Yeah, just looking at it, we've got 40% performance, 40% cost and value, 20% scalability. less interest in security and compliance.
Thank you so much for taking the poll and giving us the feedback on that. So that's great. That'll help us customize our presentation for next week. So now let's move on. So the first thing we're going to talk about is an overview of what S3 is. So S3 stands for Simple Storage Service, and it's an object-based storage mechanism, and each object can be up to 5 terabytes. So that's the limit of what the size of an object can be. So, and objects are just the files that go into it. So, so that's what you would actually upload into S3. So it is a flat structure. There is no hierarchy. So when you look at the way that it's set up is you have to create buckets within inside of S3 that are then used to then store files. You cannot create buckets within buckets, which means you do not have, there is no hierarchical structure within it. So just to be clear. So it cannot host databases. It's really an object store. So it does not host databases of any kind. So one of the things that is unique about it is that it is a universal namespace for the buckets. So when you create a namespace within S3, it has to be unique globally. So take care when you're trying to do it. It won't allow you to create it, first of all, if it's not unique, but when you go and create those namespaces, you have to make sure that they're unique. So you probably want to customize it specifically to using some prefixes for maybe your company or things like that make it specifically unique. So just keep that in mind. The mechanism for storage within inside of AWS S3 is what's called key value pairs. So the key is actually the name of the file. So so in this case, what I did was I created an example of a customer address file. It happens to be an Excel file in this case. And then the value is actually the data or the metadata within inside of that file. So so you access it based on the key, and then the value is what's being stored behind that. So, and you can see there that there's metadata includes customer name, address, city, state, and zip. S3 has an unlimited storage. So it's infinitely scalable to meet your needs. So, which is, you know, good from a data lake perspective, because usually you have a lot of information that goes into your data lake. One of the nice things about it is that it is spread across multiple devices and availability zones. And what availability zones are within Amazon are physical locations that that are data centers. So when you set it up and have it going across the availability zones, what that allows is for a lot of durability and a lot of redundancy of the data, so that you in case one of them goes down, you wouldn't have any issue with getting access to your information. We wanted to talk a little bit about what folders are. So folders can be created within inside of buckets, but they're not physical folders. What they really are, they're really a prefix that you would put in front of the file names that would then organize the files. So they're logically used the same as a folder to organize the information, but they're not a physical structure is the key to that. So if you look at the example that I'm using here, you know, I took the customer address file and I had a prefix for this with a folder for customer data. So in this case, it's got the customer address information in it, but it could also have customer contacts and other pertinent information about the customer that can be grouped using these folder structures within inside of the buckets. So a little bit of an overview of what S3 is. The next slide is going to talk about S3 and Data Lake. So there's a lot of different storage options, and we're going to get into that in the next slide. But two of the ones that are primarily used for the data lake are S3 Standard and S3 Intelligent Tiering. So the reason that they're preferred is because they have better access, better retrieval times. They're not for infrequently used data. But one of the nice things about the tiering option is that it will automatically figure out. It has a monitor and it runs and auto tiers your information. So it's going to go through and figure out what the best way to store that information is, whether it's being used frequently or infrequently, and then it's going to move it to the most cost-effective bucket, depending on what the access requirements are for it. So we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about that on the next slide. One of the important things to understand about S3 is that it decouples the compute and the storage. So S3 is just storage, it's not compute. So, and it has virtually unlimited scalability for storage, which is, good for a data lake, obviously, right? So, and so it breaks the cost of storage versus compute. So, and when you do that in AWS, what that allows you to do is manage your compute costs separately, and you can scale up and down your compute. When you think about things like Hadoop is the compute and storage is combined into one offering. So you're always processing. So the cost is different for your storage because it also includes all your compute. So it allows you to separate those and manage your costs separately, which is a nice nice feature to have. It also gives you a centralized data architecture, which allows you to easily create multi-tenant environments, so to organize the information. And then the users can use any analytics tool they want against this to analyze the same data set, and they're all looking at the same information from the data lake. The integration is set up within AWS to work seamlessly with a lot of their tools like Athena and Redshift and some of their other tools as well. And it can be serverless or it can be server-based or serverless. So it can also work very simply with Lambda. And the way they do a lot of this is based on the way they store that information, which if you store the information in the Parquet format, then it is the default format for a lot of these tools that are then being used within Amazon. So, and one of the nice features about it is that you only pay for the actual amounts of data used for the compute time. So, again, one of the things about AWS, right, is that you only pay for what you use, but the more you use, the less you pay in an aggregate. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more in the pricing as we move on in the presentation. So these are the different storage classes. So the standard one is what is used primarily for frequently used data. So, and what we're going to see throughout a lot of this is that the presentation is that these storage classes have a lot of the same features. So the low latency, the high throughput, the durability, the service level agreement levels, and then the SSL, which is the security associated with the encryption and the data in transit and the data at rest. All of these features exist in every one of the different storage classes. So I didn't want to repeat all that. I just wanted to make sure that that was upfront that we talked about it. But the idea is that the standard really is used for data that is frequently accessed by the users. So, and there's a wide variety of use cases for it. The next one is really talking about the intelligent tiering, which I discussed a little bit before. And it is designed to optimize costs by automatically moving data to the most cost-effective tier while maintaining performance. So what that means is that there's a monitoring process behind the scenes that is looking at the files that are being used and determining what is the most cost-effective way to store that information. If it's not accessed very frequently, it will move it to the infrequent access storage, which is going to cost you less. So there's really two tiers to this. One is the frequently accessed data, and one is the infrequently accessed data. And we're gonna see that when we get to the costing structure slide as well. So, but the next one is what's called standard IA, and this one is used for less frequently accessed data, but when it requires rapid access. So it's a cheaper storage mechanism, but you can also get to it because you're not accessing this data as frequently. You can still get decent retrieval times from it. Now there are two flavors of this. This one is the standard one, which uses multiple availability zones. So you've got a better durability and better retention for this. Whereas the next one, when we go to the next slide, is a one zone IA, which is 20% cheaper than the other version, the standard version, but it's only in one availability zone. So you're taking a risk at that point that if that availability zone goes down, then you wouldn't have access to your information. But really when you look at if we go back to the slide here, we've got the 11 nines here and the durability. What's the availability zone, the one availability zone one there goes to like 9997. So it's it's still pretty durable. So those are the two options for the IA. The last two options we're going to discuss are what's called Glacier. So the Glacier is secure and durable. It has a lot of the same features as the other ones, but this is really more for archiving data. So it's a really low-cost option for archiving. And the first option allows you to configure retrieval times, and you can get the data back, in theory, from minutes to hours. But the deep archive is the lowest cost storage option, and it's really used for long-term retention and preservation of data. A lot of people would use it to, like, as an alternative for magnetic tape, which is a lot of the people, when you do backups of databases and things like that, sometimes you got to write them to tape or things like that. So this is definitely an option for that. But what you've got to keep in mind is when you do this is that the retrieval times with this are good, could be up to 12 hours. So you're not going to get anything back quickly from the deep archive, depending on what your requirements are. So you can get it, you're just not going to get it as quickly. So, and then there's a retention for this for up to 7 to 10 years. So those are the different storage classes that are available within inside of AWS S3. And what we're going to see is that the pricing sort of follows along with these different storage classes as well. So, but the next slide we're going to talk about is security. So the security in S3 is set up at the bucket level, and within a bucket you can have many files. So you can secure the bucket so that the people can only see the data within that bucket, the files within that bucket. So buckets are by default private and can only be accessed by users who explicitly are granted access. So one of the best practices that we would recommend is that you go with the least privilege principle, which means you restrict access to only the people that absolutely need access to it. Because if you open it up to the public, which you have to do to give people access to it, then if you grant access to it, other people can get access to it. That's the reason you need to explicitly exclude people from this, so that you're controlling who gets access and who doesn't. The next thing I wanted to talk about is that within inside of the AWS console, there's identity and access management, which is really used to create the users, you create the users groups, you create the policies within inside of it. So this is used to really to control the access to the buckets, create the users, and then control the access. That access can be further refined through bucket policies. So you can then go and define specific access for this bucket or this object at the bucket policy level. So there's also a feature that allows you to block public access, and that's a centralized function. And what that will do is when you set that up, that will automatically go and override any other bucket or object permissions that you have created. One of the things that we would say is the next two are really talking about best practices, and you got to be careful who you give write access to these buckets, because that allows people to write new files to these buckets, but more importantly, it allows people to delete files from these buckets. And a lot of times you want to control the content of these files centrally. So you don't want to be giving everyone write access to this, because you really want to try and control what's going on in your S3 environment and the information that's available within it. One of the other things that we highly recommend is creating user groups using IAM, which allows you to assign users to the groups, and then all of the bucket access and the further security, granular security that you're going to set up can be managed through the user groups, as opposed to having to do it for all the individual users. So it's almost like a tiered hierarchy there. So that's what we have on security. Pricing, when we look at this slide, what it shows across the top are the different retrievals. So standard is going to be the most frequently accessed information. Then you've got the infrequent accessed information, and then you've got the Glacier. So you can see the cost goes down as you go from the frequently accessed information to storing it at the infrequently accessed, and then to the Glacier. So the Glacier is significantly cheaper. But again, that's for the deep archive. So, and what you'll also notice is that as you go down the right-hand side, the first 50 terabytes will cost you, 0.023 cents per gigabyte. As you get up and as you start using more storage, the price actually starts to go down, which is one of the basic principles of AWS. So as you start going up, the price goes down, and then you can see that by request, there are going to be costs for the put and the copy and the post on the list, and then the get. There's going to be costs for the gets as well. So they're charging you as you access that information, as the users are accessing it. And just as a footnote down there at the bottom, I put in that Glacier is the cheapest option because of the length of retrieval, but it's used primarily for data archiving. So the next slide is really the summary slide. So S3 is a cost-effective approach to implementing a data lake. There's many different storage options for the different types of data you want to store. Security can be set up to manage your bucket and objects, and you should only provide access to people who absolutely need that data. And the pricing is by storage class, with the faster retrieval times costing more, and the more storage you use, the less per monthly price you pay per gigabyte. So that is the overview of S3 and the data lake. So we will go to Q&A. So Jeff, do you have anything out for Q&A?
I do. I will remind people they can ask questions by typing in the little question box. And we do have a couple of questions. The first one is what file format should be used for storing data in S3?
Well, you can store the data in any file format you want. You can just copy data up there in Excel or CSV, JPEGs, whatever you want. Any kind of object can go up into that storage. But if it's data related, then it would be used with other AWS tools. You should really think about storing the data in a Parquet format, which is the standard format inside of S3 that is then going to be the most compatible with the other AWS services. So, and when you use Glue to upload the data into S3, it'll automatically, you can set it to automatically convert that information into the Parquet format. So it's a relatively standard process.
Thank you. Next question, which I think I'll answer, is what is DMS, which is on the architecture slide that I talked about. And I guess I might just mention Glue. So Glue is Amazon's sort of bulk ETL code service for moving data back and forth. It's good for bulk data transfer, especially when you're handling with files. DMS is the database migration service that lets you copy data from relational databases, and it can do a full copy or an incremental copy. It has change data capture for some scenarios. So it's a good way if you have data from databases that you want to bring into S3. DMS is a good way to do it.
Great, thanks, Jeff.
Let's see. The next question is, the next question is about what you were saying about folders. Could you explain what you mean when you said they're not, like they're folders, but they're not folders?
Yeah, so they work the same as folders, but they're not physical structures inside of S3. So they're really prefixes to files that allow you to organize the files inside of the buckets. So, like the customer data example that I put in would just be a folder that goes in front of the actual file name that allows you to organize them. And really, what it is it's just a matter of organizing that information to make it easier to retrieve it and find it and retrieve it out of the buckets. But they're not physical structures. They're really just prefixes to those files that allow you to organize the information in that manner.
So
does that answer the question?
I hope so. I think so. I guess the other thing I would say is you had mentioned earlier that you can't create buckets inside buckets. And so I guess what that really means is that the main difference is that from a, whatever rights and billing and all those other perspectives, you have to do it at the bucket level. Right,
and the bucket and the object level. So you can't even assign, you can't really even assign any kind of security to the folders. It's really either a bucket or an object. So it's really all those folders are used for is just to organize that information.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, does S3 work with third-party tools like Snowflake?
Yes, it does. And, there's integration tools that can be used to then, move data from S3 into Snowflake. So it's really considered, open, so you can get to, anything you want. But, the different tools work better than other tools when you're trying to move data from one place to another within Amazon. So, but yes, no, it's easily accessed through to any other source with inside of the, that you want to move the data to from into another database.
Thank you. The next question is, Glacier is very cheap. Is there any way to use that for a data lake?
I'm sorry?
Is there any way to use Glacier, the Glacier storage tier, for a data lake?
Well, not really. I mean, you could. There's not saying you can't, but the problem really is, right, is the retrieval times, right? Because if you're expecting to get any kind of performance out of the Glacier, that's not going to happen easily, right? I mean, you can set it up to maybe get things back in minutes, but if you're looking to have performance, which, if you're trying to do analytics on the data, you don't want to store it in something that's going to take hours to retrieve the information. So ideally, you would want to store it in a format or in the tiering structure that would say, okay, this is the frequently used information, this is the less frequently used information, or you store it in standard where you have standard level agreements on the retrieval times for that information, so that obviously the users don't want to wait forever if they're trying to do analytics on this information.
Yep. All right, and I think this is probably the last question unless another one comes in. How do I go about calculating what storage tier I should use?
Well, I think it really depends on what the information is. So there's not a simple answer to what that. You would have to do the analysis on your information to understand what is frequently accessed and what is less frequently accessed, because you can break it up into the different storage classes, but you got to understand when you're doing that you're setting it up to say, I'm going to use this method because I want it to be, I know it's going to be less frequently accessed than this storage class, which I know is going to be accessed more. So you have flexibility in the way you do it. You're not locked into one or the other. You can do multiples, but you've also got to understand what the data usage is for that information to be able to understand the most efficient way to store it.
Okay, and actually one last question. I guess that ties to that a little bit. Is there any limit on the number of buckets you can create in an AWS account?
Not to my knowledge. I think you can create as many buckets as you want. So the next slide is really talking about our upcoming events for Take30. So, and then one of the things I wanted to show everyone is that this is also available on our website. So when you come out to our to the Ironside Group website, what you'll see is, let me just wait for it not to get past the COVID outbreak. If we click on this, it'll take you right to the Take30. So you can see all the Take30 information down here. But one of the things I wanted to show you was that if you wanted to schedule a one-on-one call with our data scientists or our BI experts or our data advisors, you can click on this here, and it'll allow you to schedule some one-on-one time if you have specific questions that you wanted to ask around certain topics that are important to you and your business. So we wanted to give you a little overview of that, and we want to thank you for coming to the Take30 today. Hopefully it was informative, and we look forward to seeing you again at the next Take30.